mean, this is what everybody, Joe, you, Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, all sorts of people have been saying now for a very long time that the end goal of this is to make it impossible to publish classified information, even request, even build contacts with people inside the system who would give you classified information that would expose malfeasance, war crimes, fraud, and the lies of empire. I'm just curious at this point what the New York Times ran an editorial, but they totally, the media totally dropped the ball on this one, and very naively bought into first the character assassination, secondly the characterization of Julian and WikiLeaks as something other than a publisher or a reputable entity in the world of journalism, and essentially defended their passivity and I would argue complicity by saying, well, look, he's only been charged with attempting to hack into or attempting to assist Chelsea Manning in terms of hacking into a government computer. But I think all of us who followed this closely understood the dire and very dangerous ramifications, which have now, in essence, been made public. This is what it is not, of course, the application of the rule of law. It's the evisceration of the rule of law. Julian Assange is not an American citizen. WikiLeaks is not a US-based publication. And the message is now anyone, anywhere, of any nationality who dares to expose or shine a light into the inner workings of imperial power and the American empire will face extraordinary rendition and life in a supermax prison in Florence, Colorado.
Chris, we're seeing an enormous change in the opinion of the media towards Assange. And we've been talking a lot about Rachel Maddow. Well, fortunately, Katie Johnstone has written a piece about what she had to say last night. And just to summarize, because I was reading about it, reading her words before, she's saying that this is an outrage and that Assange is a journalist and this is what we do for a living and we have to get behind him on this. I mean, she has come out in favor of Assange. Now, she decided she hated Trump more than Assange. Of course, she had to throw in there that he's an odious person and all that, and that's totally irrelevant. But
it's also not true. I mean, this just makes me sick. I mean, Rachel Maddow has never met Julian Assange. How would she know if he's an odious person or not? I mean, I don't think at this point, because publications like the New York Times, the Guardian, and others essentially were complicit in the lynching of Julian Assange. It's late. It's good that they finally woken up, but they should have woken up a long time ago when those of us in the wilderness were, Cassandra-like crying out that this is really the death of investigative journalism, and that's what it is. So I'm glad to see that they recognize the severity of the moment, but they were in essence, the prime institutions that were used to demonize and carry out the kind of character assassination that was relentlessly pursued to discredit and isolate Julian Assange and his supporters.
Well, they're jumping on our bandwagon now, and they'll probably brush us aside as insignificant once they pick this up. But this is really important because I think I was saying before how Dan Ellsberg told me 10 years ago that when he went to Congress with the Pentagon Papers, none of the senators wanted to do it because he'd hoped if they'd read it that the press would report on it. Then he realized that he'd have to go to the press first because Congress doesn't do a damn thing till they read something in the newspaper and realize they have to act. So And also in the Tom Drake case, the good press that he got towards the end helped him beat the government on that charge, false charge of leaking classified information to the Baltimore Sun. So what role do you think the press, if it in fact finally comes around to supporting Assange, A, as a journalist, B, as innocent, and seeing that this indictment only indicts him for journalism? They say clearly that Chelsea Manning had legal access to the information, and Assange's crimes were encouraging him to give more information to help hide his identity, her identity. That's what it clearly says.
Yeah.
So what role can the press play here and in Britain or in Sweden as well in putting pressure on those courts not to extradite him, or if he should come here, to help influence the way the government deals with him?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think, for instance, the New York Times position was important and useful, but as I argued before, it's very late. And the Times in particular was one of the journalistic institutions that was used quite effectively to isolate and demonize Assange when those of us who were raising these kinds of issues and issuing these kinds of warnings were being pushed aside. So let's never forget that these institutions are complicit in the state of affairs in which we're in. The other thing that worries me is that the drive to lynch Julian Assange and Wikileaks is bipartisan. Both the Democratic and the Republican Party establishment are determined to get WikiLeaks. Unlike with the Pentagon Papers, there is not a significant bloc within the Democratic Party. As a matter of fact, I don't even know of any major Democratic elected official who's willing to support Julian Assange. And that's an important difference. And the press is very anemic. The press is very weak. The press has been complicit in bringing us to this moment. It is important, you're right, that they have finally decided to recognize what's at stake here. But our democratic institutions are, anemic or dead, and it's very clear, both within the hierarchy of the Democratic Party and the hierarchy of the Trump administration, that they don't really give a damn what the press says. They're going to try and go ahead for this. So, I mean, for me, I'm going to go to London for the hearing on the 12th and do a bunch of shows, with various people, including George Galloway. Is he on there? I'm trying to get him on my show to raise the issue. And I don't know the British judiciary. I just hope that it has a degree of independence that the American judiciary does not, and can defend the rule of law, which would mean that and Julian, who is not committed a crime, is allowed to go home to Australia.
It will be a great day.
Why do you think it is that it's just taken this long for the press to realize that they're next after Assange is potentially punished or prosecuted in this way?
Because they refused to acknowledge or accept that there were a series of other indictments that have now been made public under the Espionage Act. And the out that they were offered and that they took was first, of course, you saw with Alex Gibney's film, which was just agitprop for the security and surveillance state, that he was hiding out from prosecutors, Swedish prosecutors, and that's the only reason he was in there. And then the next fallacy was that the United States only wanted to extradite him for the charge of trying to hack into government computers. I mean, anyone who believed that has zero understanding of how angered the deep state was by the revelations that probably the most important journalistic revelations in decades, certainly since the Pentagon Papers, how deeply embarrassed and angered the deep state was and how determined that they were to get Julian. So it's very hard to deny. I mean, it's in black and white now. This is not just an assault against WikiLeaks or Julian Assange, but against the entire press. But again, I have to go back to my other point that the press was a willing partner in the efforts to demonize and isolate Julian Assange and his supporters, when, of course, they should have been more astute and I think understood, number one, was what was at stake here, and number two, what the state decided to do. But now they have no deniability; it's completely out there, and they anyone who reads it understands that noose is not just for Julian and WikiLeaks; it's for anybody who attempts at this point to publish material and information or release documents that the state wants to keep secret.
Yeah, and as a follow-up question to that statement, do you believe that if Assange is prosecuted under these charges, will the New York Times, the Guardian, Der Spiegel, and other outlets that partnered with WikiLeaks to publish the 2010, Cablegate releases and other releases that WikiLeaks published, will they also be prosecuted? Because it really seems like they would be open to that under these charges.
Well, but this now there isn't a legal precedence. I mean, this creates the legal precedence to prosecute them. That's the whole point. And the animosity that the Trump administration, figures like Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Trump himself have towards the press is quite public and quite open. And they will use anything they can get their hands on. So I have little to doubt that once this judicial precedence is set, if it is set, I hope it isn't, it will not in any way end with Julian Assange or WikiLeaks.